Hello and welcome to Heroes and Humans of Football. My name is Mehreen Khan.
And I'm Simon Cooper. This is the football show where we take the hero and we show you the human.
From Johan Cruyff to Megan Rapinoe.
And from George Best to Kylian Mbappé.
This is the Human Football Podcast.
So today we're talking about Kylian Mbappé, the man who hit football fully formed as a teenager, who won a World Cup age 19, who may be the best footballer of his generation, the best footballer of the post-Messi world. And we're going to tell the story of somebody who was a natural athlete and then grew up in the ideal family, in the ideal city to become a great footballer. So this is a story of him, of his very important parents, of Paris, and also of Paris's suburbs, because Paris, the beautiful city of the postcards, is 2 million people. The suburbs where Kylian grew up, that's 10 million people, and they're the base of the French national team, probably the biggest talent pool in football. Mbappé, as I've been taught, not Mbappé.
I'm going to try my best with that one.
Do it.
So, Mbappé becomes the first teenager to score in a World Cup final since Pelé in Russia in 2018. By the time he's 23, he's already scored 4 goals in the World Cup final.
And by his 25th birthday, which was December 2023, very recently as we record, he had scored 304 official goals. Leo Messi, by his 25th birthday, 279. Cristiano Ronaldo, 160. So just in terms of pure goals, I admit, not the whole story of football, Mbappé is pretty much unparalleled. In World Cups, he has 12 goals, same as Pelé, way ahead of Cristiano and Maradona. And he has a very good shot of becoming the highest World Cup scorer ever. He's only 4 behind the leader, Miroslav Klose. And in 2022, at his club Paris Saint-Germain, he signed the biggest contract of any athlete in any sport ever at the time to earn 630 million euros, which is well over 500 million pounds over 3 years. But he will not serve out that contract because this summer, although it hasn't been announced, everyone understands that Kylian is going to move from Paris to Real Madrid, the club that have been courting him since literally his 14th birthday.
Simon, you've been living in Paris for 20 years and covering world football. How does Paris help us understand Mbappé?
I'm very deep into Paris football in that I'm a football dad, and for the last 10 years, I've been taking my kids on freezing weekend mornings to fields all over the Paris suburbs for their matches. You know, most Paris suburbs, people think of them as these incredibly poor, slum-like places like the Brazilian favelas. It's not like that. The banlieue, where occasionally there are riots that make world news. They're not on the whole like that at all. They tend to be a bit drab, working class or low middle class. Some are quite wealthy, some of the suburbs, but they're kind of well maintained. They're health centers. You know, you walk along the high streets and there's nice little cafes. There's even now cheese shops and middle class things. France is building 68 metro stations to connect the suburbs finally to the city. And what you find in every suburb is a beautifully maintained sports complex with artificial fields where people are playing on that field for 16 or 18 hours a day, people of all ages. And that's where I've spent a lot of my weekend mornings. And over time, in these last 10 years, watching Mbappe's rise, but not only him, I've realized, wow, my kids are lucky enough to be growing up as footballers in the best place to be a footballer in the world. I mean, if you think of some of the Parisian footballers who've dominated global football in that era, beyond Mbappé, you have Pogba, you have N'Golo Kanté, you have Blaise Matuidi, but you also have a lot of guys who play for North African teams, like Riyad Mahrez. He plays for Algeria, but the guy is a Parisian. He grew up in the Parisian suburbs. At the recent African Nations Cup, you have lots of teams like Senegal, Algeria, Morocco. The Morocco coach at the World Cup is another Parisian. So the talent of the Paris region staffs not just the French national team, which in the last 20 years has been most of the time about the best national team in the world, but also many other national teams.
As soon as you mention that, the first thing that comes into my head is South London and cage football. So South London is a pocket of London where kids play football in enclosed spaces with cages. So the pitches are really small, big kids play with little kids. And it is, I wouldn't say the equivalent of the banlieue, but they overrepresent when it comes to young English footballers coming from South London who breaking into the Premier League. So what's the defining feature of banlieue football that produces this level of talent?
The Paris suburbs are generally quite poor. You have a lot of poor kids who are don't have that much else to focus on. So on the whole, they're not taking violin lessons. They're not going on long holidays abroad. Some of them are not doing much schoolwork. So you have this population that spends a lot of time playing football, where the French state has built these artificial fields all over the suburbs and maintains them. And I would take my kids, there's one sports complex called the Stade Karl Marx, the Karl Marx Stadium, because a lot of the banlieues used to be ruled by communists. And you go into the Stade Karl Marx and the dressing rooms are warm and there are several fields. And it's just all these kids have a place nearby to play where you're trained by coaches with diplomas. So all these kids we're talking about, Mbappé and the others, they are coached by qualified coaches from a very young age. And the other thing is, if you're a kid growing up in the Paris region, you look at people like Pogba and Mbappé, it's not so far away. You think, I can do that too. So you have all these, what they call the plan Mbappé, which is that often the father and the son are both working on the son becoming the next Mbappé, which I think sometimes is quite ruinous and leads to a huge amount of fanaticism. But you have that all over the Paris region. So I see in my boys' world, they know quite a lot of kids who are in professional academies, because if you're in the Paris region, getting into a professional academy is just not that unusual.
There's a little paradox in the fact that there's a caricature of the banlieues being deprived, a place where the state doesn't exist, a place that has been left on the outer regions of Paris and gets no attention. But then you're talking about quite well-resourced football pitches, coaches who know what they're doing. And has that happened as a result of some of the players who've made it big, or is this actually a state operation to say, let's develop our sporting talent in the banlieue?
I mean, the French state is very big and very present. So I've been as a journalist to some of the poorest parts of the UK as well, like Birkenhead near Liverpool or North Manchester, and the state is not very present there. And you won't find, kind of glittering medical facilities or big sports complexes maintained by the state. And in France, you do. The state does lay on that stuff. But also, often the suburbs will spend an enormous part of its budget on sport, because that's what the Paris suburbs are currently very proud of. And so in some suburbs, the whole youth budget is the sports budget.
So how can you measure the fact that this region is producing, the biggest sports football factory in the world? How do we know that?
Well, there's a Serbian sociologist called Darko Dukic, and in 2018 at the World Cup, he calculated if you add all the national teams in the world together, Greater Paris had produced 60 players and coaches who'd been in the previous 5 World Cups, with the French team and with other national teams. So that's 60 in 5 World Cups. That's more than any other urban area in the world. I mean, Buenos Aires ranks high, Madrid ranks high. Paris is number one.
And Mbappé grew up in one of these banlieues.
Yeah, so Mbappé is from Bondy, which is a suburb a little bit northeast of Paris. I went there by bus in 2017. I was interested in this phenomenal youngster who had already broken into the French team aged 18. And so I arranged interviews with his youth coaches. And Bondy, at the time, there was this massive mural of Kylian on one of the walls of the apartment buildings already, 18 years old. Yeah. So he was a hero very, very early on. But Bondy is one of the poorer suburbs of Paris, and it always has been. It was built on a forest where highwaymen used to lay in wait to ambush stagecoaches that were leaving Paris. And by about the 1850s, excrement from Paris is being taken out to Bondy and dumped there. So it's really kind of your word, not mine, not good. But yeah, it was literally that. And from about the 1960s, you get immigrants arriving there and being, like many immigrants to France, being kind of shoved out to the Paris suburbs. So if you go around Bondy now, if you go around Kylian Mbappe's hometown, it looks like somebody has taken an ancient French village, still there's a little old church there, and plonked a Soviet town with Soviet apartment blocks on top of it, then added fast food joints and a football club. But Mbappe's family are extremely high functioning, and they're also mixed, which is increasingly typical of the Paris suburbs. His father, Wilfrid, the family had come from Cameroon, and his mother, Fayza, is of Algerian origin. At the time when they got together, that was quite an odd relationship that created some initial hostility from the people around them. A West African man, Christian, and a North African woman, Muslim. So that caused some trouble, but they got over it. They get married and they grow into local pillars of the French Republic, and they help keep Bondy running for many years. They're just the kind of people in a place like that everybody knows, and every kid has dealt with one or the other. So Fayza runs leisure activities for children. She's an assistant in a school. Fayza is completely obsessive about education to this day. And Wilfrid, the father, is a coach at the local football club, AS Bondy. And Wilfrid coached almost every boy in Bondy. So, for example, the Arsenal defender, William Saliba, who is from Bondy, He says he learned everything he knew from Wilfrid and Mbappé. Or when Kylian's school class, there's a school trip to Greece, and this is from a suburb where a lot of the parents have no money. Some families
Kids have passports even.
And don't have passports, all sorts of issues. And Fayza, Kylian's mother, makes it her business that every kid in this class is going to go on the school trip to Greece, and she just makes sure that happens. So they're kind of parents to the whole of Bondy. I mean, they're kind of the dream of what the French Republic should be about. And Kylian grows up in his childhood bedroom overlooking AS Bondy's artificial football field. So he can see the field from the bedroom window.
This is almost the ideal. He has aspirational parents, one who's already involved in local football and is part of the talent machine of the area.
Yeah, and Fayza was a very good handball player, so she's also big in sport.
So the genetics are pretty strong.
The genetics and also the seriousness about sport. His uncle is also an amateur football coach. So Kylian spends his early childhood going around with his dad and uncle to their games and sitting in changing rooms, often with adults, listening to his dad or uncle deliver the team talk. Kylian Mbappé has probably heard more team talks than anyone else in football, and he absorbs it. He learns to think of football as a coach and not as a player. He sees the game through the coach's eyes. You know, I interviewed him in 2021, and we'll get back to that, but he says most players are trying to perform their task and they're worrying about their own game. And he said, I'm a very unusual player that I can think about the other person's game. I can look at the right back and think, you're having a problem with this, we need to sort that out. So on the field and off the field, he has a coach's view of everything that's going on.
Combined with his incredible physical talent and ability to play the game, he can also think about the game.
Yeah, and the talent gives him something else as well. Because he's always too good for his age class, he's always playing with older kids. He's then also always with his father and uncle going around football. And so he's constantly being exposed to adults and to older boys. He becomes very quickly mature beyond his years. But yeah, he's got this perfect combination. He is a natural, and he's also being professionally coached at home from about the age of 0. It's very clear that he's a mega talent, and in a lot of families that creates this kind of dream and obsession, and the whole family relationship becomes inverted, so the child becomes the center of the family and the parents start dreaming about the big bag of money that lies in wait. But the Mbappés, these are people who have their heads screwed on very firmly. These are people who are high functioning, who are totally in control. Fayza and Wilfrid are always on him about schoolwork. So, you know, you think you're going to be a big megastar footballer, you're going to do your schoolwork. And Wilfried's like that with every kid he's coaching. So the local schools will call Wilfrid the father and say, that boy in your under-12s team, he's been failing at maths. And Wilfrid will call the boy in and say, you are not training until you get your maths grade to a pass. So the parents are extremely serious about learning. And his mother's ambition, I mean, she kind of sees this kid might become a footballer, but her real ambition is for him to attend HEC, which is the elite Parisian business school usually attended by the children of the Parisian elite. He learns pretty fluent English and Spanish, and he's also a not very good flutist in the local music school, but he attends the local music school for years, and later when he gets rich, he actually funds the local music school quite extravagantly.
So his parents are raising a very well-rounded boy who might be very good at football, but they also want him to succeed in all areas of life, academic and non-academic, just in case he doesn't make it.
Well, not just in case he doesn't make it, but because education is great. Because Fayza loves education. She doesn't want her kid to be a school dropout who becomes a multimillionaire footballer. She wants her kid to be a brilliant pupil. And also, he is a very, very clever kid.
And you've also got this theory, Simon, that if he wasn't a footballer, that he would have an alternate career as...
If he hadn't played football, he'd have been a popular school teacher somewhere in the Paris region. That's my answer for him. But it's not going to happen because at least by the time he's 12, it's pretty obvious where he's heading. He's not really dreaming of being a great footballer. He's going to be a great footballer. He knows it. His parents know it. And he spends a year at the Central French Football Academy in Clairefontaine, where the other kids actually nickname him Mbebe because he's younger than anyone else and sometimes he sulks like a baby. And I actually asked one of his youth coaches, you know, he went to Clairefontaine, the Central Academy, this kind of legendary place for a year. Did he come back different? And the youth coach said, no, he was already really good. I don't think he needed to go to that academy. He had it all already.
And I've seen pictures of him. He can't have been more than an early teenager where he's going around elite clubs, one of whom's Chelsea, and he's having some trials or just spending a week.
Yeah, Chelsea, your
around.
lads missed out on him. They tried because every big club in Europe scouts in the Paris region. And of course, they all spot Mbappé. You don't have to be a genius to spot Mbappé age 12. He's better than everyone else. And so Ryan Giggs has said that Manchester United scouts watched Mbappé for a year and they went to the then head coach Louis van Gaal and said, you should sign this kid. And Van Gaal wasn't interested. Chelsea invite him for a visit, so he goes to London. And very importantly, so do Real Madrid. They invite him over around his 14th birthday. And while he's there, he gets a legendary selfie, is now legendary, with Cristiano Ronaldo. And also, Real Madrid are, of course, very canny. They aim to impress the kid. French kid visiting Real Madrid, who is the kid likely to be most impressed by? Of course, it's Zinedine Zidane. So Zidane is deputed as a kind of Uber driver to drive Mbappé to watch first team training. And Zidane rolls up in his car. And of course, it's the most beautiful car that the 14-year-old Mbappé has ever seen. And Zidane says, hop in, kid. Mbappé is totally overawed. I mean, here's, the biggest hero of France and this car. And Mbappé says, should I take off my shoes before I get in your car? And Zidane says, no, don't worry, it's fine, you can get in. He loves Madrid and they've been after him ever since. He tells a story about how when he gets back from his 3 days at Madrid, age 14, he says he's touched the stars. And his mother says, yeah, good to see you back. Now you're going to spend 3 days cleaning the classrooms at the school where I work, because it'll be good for you. Mbappé says he was not very impressed with this at the time, but he says with hindsight, now he would do exactly what his mother had done. She was saying to him, you're going to keep your head screwed on. You're not just going to think you're some kind of megastar. From childhood on, he knows he's going to be a star, but the family have to manage where and how. Of course, it's a difficult journey from brilliant 14-year-old to megastar, and a lot of brilliant 14-year-olds don't make it. And there's another issue that Mbappé faces on the road to French stardom, which is he's a black kid from the suburbs with an Arab mother. Because this is a country where the far right is very strong. France might unfortunately get a far-right president at the next elections in 2027, where a lot of the French population have said in surveys for 25 years that they think there are too many non-white players in the national team. It's not easy for even the most brilliant and talented black footballer to be accepted by France.
And so when we started off at the top of this show saying that Kylian has the ideal environment in which to become a successful footballer. He has parents who care about him. He's in a region where it's already hyper-competitive at a very young age. My first reaction is it ideal being a black kid in France to get to the top of your game? I also found it quite telling that when we were discussing what his alternate career would be, it wasn't the CEO of a big French corporation or something in an elite environment around business and politics. It was about being a school teacher. Is that a kind of tacit admission about how difficult in other spheres of life for a black man to get to the top in France?
I mean, the French say the social escalator is blocked, and the people who are blocking it at the top of the social escalator is the white elite in the center of Paris, and their kids get those jobs as CEOs, as top civil servants. And it's very hard for a black kid from the suburbs to break into that. Even in football, France has this incredible talent base in its capital city, outside its capital city, mostly non-white kids who are emerging as brilliant footballers, who helped win a World Cup in 98, have reached the World Cup final in 2006. And now in Kylian's generation, again, they're looking brilliant. And then you have a population that often feels there are too many black kids in the national team. And when Kylian is 12, there's a quota affair, the affair of the quotas, because there's this secret conversation in the French Football Federation led by France's head coach, Laurent Blanc, the guy who played
and won the World Cup in
1998, although he was suspended for the final. And he and other officials have this secret discussion in the French Football Federation about there are too many black boys entering club academies. We have to reduce that. We have to have quotas to stop our academies filling up with black boys. And this leaks, but Laurent Blanc doesn't have to resign, amazingly, as head coach, and the other officials do not have to resign despite the obvious racism implicit in this conversation. And so this becomes a huge topic of conversation. Of course, Mbappé, as this kid who's becoming a brilliant footballer, he's 12 years old at this point, and he's part black and part Arab. And there's a video of him at age 12 wearing an AC Milan shirt, and he's commenting on the affair of the quotas. And he says, if you look at the history, the best players were always blacks and Arabs. So he's kind of claiming his identity with pride, but he knows that he's entering a hostile environment. And when I asked him about this in our interview, he said to me, look, I've always felt French. Nobody has ever made me feel as if I'm not French. And I think that's true. I think he has always felt French. And I think most kids in the banlieue growing up like him, they think, I am French, but they know that some people don't accept them as French. But his family has always understood that he's going to have to tread very carefully and not do anything to offend mainstream white French sensibilities if he's going to become a hero of France, accepted even by the 40% or so of the population who now vote far right in the presidential election runoff.
And I think it's important to stress for people perhaps in the Anglosphere, where conversations about racism have become much more part of the way we think about society and culture. Like, from what I can tell, France is a kind of country where people will still say things like they're colorblind and they don't see color and color doesn't exist. You're only French. So it's difficult to have serious conversations about race. And even this comment when he's a young kid saying blacks and Arabs, that's quite an incendiary thing to say even in 2024 France, because you're not allowed to have identifiers like black or Arab.
I mean, living in Paris, which I do, and then going across to England where we're recording here in London. So I'm very often on the Eurostar from Paris to London, and I'll be back on it tonight after we've recorded. And so I'm always comparing the two cities. And it's true that in Paris, the conversation about race is, I would say, 10 or 20 years behind where it is in the UK. So we're sitting in the UK now in a country where there is a non-white prime minister, and I think hardly anyone cares.
And a non-white mayor.
And a non-white mayor of London, and a non-white head of the Scottish Nationalist Party. These things are just not issues, I think, for almost anyone in the country. It's normal. And in France, it's very hard to imagine those things. It's very hard to imagine a black president. The first prominent far-right leader in France was Jean-Marie Le Pen. And in the 1990s, when the French national team starts to fill up with brilliant non-white players, Le Pen attacks them and says, I don't like it that we bring these people from Africa and we call them French people and we put them in the national team, which is a horrible thing to say, partly because they haven't been brought as African footballers. They've either been born in France of African parents, like Mbappé, or they've immigrated as small children, like Patrick Vieira or Marcel Desailly. And Le Pen is kind of saying they're not really French people. And a lot of the French population believes this and think there are too many non-whites in the national team. And we're now worried that in 2027, Jean-Marie Le Pen's daughter, Marine Le Pen, could become the first far-right president of France. So you could have a country which is led by a far-right leader who's very suspicious of French people of immigrant origin, while the French people of immigrant origin have made France also the best football team in the world.
And on the football side, I think it's worth stressing that these stories of the racism around the national team are not necessarily ancient history. We still have stories today, one of them involving Christophe Galtier, former manager of PSG, who made comments about black players, about Muslims in France, which is, now back in the public spotlight. So this isn't something that I think has been consigned to the 90s or the 2000s. No. It's still very much part of, it looks like the fabric of French football needs to confront this even today.
Agreed.
So whether modern France is ever going to accept Kylian or not, the guy's undisputable talent means that he's difficult to ignore, and it looks like he's just on a one-way track to stardom already.
Yeah, he's on a jet plane to become hero of France. But the family have to manage this ascent very carefully, because every club in football pretty much wants Mbappé. So Barcelona is interested, Real Madrid, his hometown team, Paris Saint-Germain, have been courting him for ages. And the family say no to all these big clubs, and they make this, on the face of it, surprising choice that he's going to start his career at Monaco. Not historically one of the hugest clubs in Europe, but they choose Monaco because they're a smaller club. There's a fast track to the first team. Monaco also employ teachers who work in the actual club stadium who can school Mbappé for the baccalaureate, which is the French equivalent of A-levels, the high school final exam that if you pass, you can go to university. Doing le bac is non-negotiable for Wilfrid and Fayza. They don't care if their kid is playing for France already by that point. He is damn well going to sit and pass the bac. And he does. He passes it at 17. And by the time he does his back, he is already a star. He has become a first-team regular with Monaco. He's scoring all the time. He's scoring in the Champions League. It just has come really easy for him, his entry into football. He's playing alongside Radamel Falcao, the veteran Colombian striker who teaches him a lot. He's very generous with him. Falcao sees this kid has everything and he wants to help. Mbappe will be on the field with these veteran Ligue 1 players, these guys in their late 20s and 30s, and he sees the stress on their faces as they play or as they stand in the tunnel. And he thinks, I don't feel that stress at all. Everything came easily to him. He didn't feel he had to make sacrifices to get there. He feels that he's born to this.
And his parents at this point are acting as his agents. So they're his representatives. He hasn't hired anyone to go off and tout him around.
I believe that to this day, his parents, who have since separated, they represent him. So there are lawyers who they employ, but they don't have an agent. These contracts, usually it's Fayza negotiating it. And so she's sitting there, this woman who's been an assistant in a school in Bondy, negotiating contracts for hundreds of millions of euros. And so Monaco, he just kind of blows the whole thing away. He's brilliant. And summer 2017, the kid is 18 years old. He's made his debut for France already. Real Madrid come back. Real Madrid had invited him over when he was 14 years old. They've kept in touch. And Florentino Perez, the president of Real Madrid, billionaire construction magnate, he comes to see Mbappe. And he says something like, you see, I'm a busy man. I'm a powerful man. You're only an 18-year-old kid, but I've made time to come and see you because we really like you. We want you to come to Madrid. And Mbappe thinks, who do you think you are? You think I should be grateful that you've made a bit of time for me? And he's very put off by this. And perhaps for that reason, perhaps for some other reasons, he chooses instead to go to his hometown club, Paris Saint-Germain. So the Parisian boy comes back to Paris, and Paris pledged to pay a transfer fee of 180 million euros. It's the same sum they buy Neymar, and I think Neymar's transfer fee is the highest in history, and Mbappe's is the second highest, and the kid is 18 years old.
Okay, so Mbappe is 18 years old. He's a superstar who's been signed on a mammoth transfer fee to play for PSG, which means now he's regularly playing the Champions League. He's at the French champions. How does he handle being the youngest and the best at PSG and breaking through into the French national team in a world where hierarchies will really matter?
How to be the youngest and the best at the same time. Really complicated tightrope walk, and we'll come back to that after the break.
Future you faces some big expectations. Work out more, go to bed earlier, and most importantly, make smart money decisions. Thankfully, today you has Bank of America. One place with tools and guidance to help balance tasks from budgeting to saving. So you can just be you with big plans. Do more with a bank that asks, what would you like the power to do? Explore our tips and more at bankofamerica.com/futureyou.
This is a reminder that you're listening to the Heroes and Humans of Football podcast with me, Mehreen Khan.
And me, Simon Cooper.
Okay, so he's 18 years old. He's playing for his hometown club, who are now awash with Qatari money. We're still talking about the French league. So, in the general state of European leagues, some people derogatorily call it a farmers' league, but he's at the apex of French football. As an 18-year-old, how does he deal with being in the men's game and having actually such a huge price tag on him?
Yeah, so football changing rooms are really hierarchical places. In Italian changing rooms, there's a concept of the campione. And the campione is a guy who's ideally won a World Cup. And if the campione opens his mouth, everybody shuts up and you listen to the campione. And if you're a youngster, you have your peg in a corner of the changing room and you don't speak except when spoken to.
You clean people's boots.
It's an environment where hierarchy is very rigid and important. And Mbappe faces the complexity that he's the youngest, but he's also possibly the best. So what is his place in the hierarchy? And the thing about Mbappe is the kid has grown up in changing rooms. He spent every weekend since he was about 4 years old with his dad and uncle going around the changing rooms of the Paris suburbs, adult teams, listening to the team talks, watching the adult team talk, seeing the tensions inside the team. He's a very observant kid, and he understands I have to find my place in this hierarchy and not piss everybody off by being this wonder kid who doesn't know how to behave. And so he told me, the first time he walks into the France dressing room, he's 18 years old. He says, when you walk into a changing room like that, nobody wants you there. He said the players who play for France, they have succeeded because their whole life has been about nobody takes my place in this team. I am going to fight to the death to keep my place in this team. And I'm certainly not going to give up my place to this 18-year-old overpaid kid with a big mouth. And so Mbappé understands he's got to do two things in this changing room. He has to be both super confident and respectful at the same time. He has to carry off that balance. And so he immediately understands the rules. Where is he allowed to sit in the changing room? Where is he allowed to sit on the team bus? At meals, which table should he join? And these things matter in a football team. In addition, he speaks better than other footballers. So he's immediately comfortable talking to the media. The media love him because he's a highly articulate 18-year-old who can discourse in a way that most footballers can't. And of course, that's also calculated to get up the nose of players who don't have that facility with words.
So the first time that I notice Mbappé in real life and not on video games is the World Cup 2018. He's a teenager. He's playing for France, who are my adopted team at every World Cup.
You don't support England?
I don't support England. I always support France, sometimes Germany. I know that makes no sense to most people, but here we are. And there's one particular game at that World Cup, which is his breakthrough match.
Yes, it's the day that suddenly everyone in the world with any interest in football knows who Kylian Mbappé is. France are playing Argentina, World Cup knockout, Messi, obviously, but Messi is overshadowed by this 19-year-old kid who quite early in the match does a 70-meter sprint. He's going at nearly 37 kilometers an hour. It's actually a bit like Michael Owen's run against Argentina for England 20 years earlier. Mbappé is fouled at the end of these 70 metres. France get a penalty. He also scores himself two very coolly taken goals. I mean, he was lucky playing against an Argentina team that was not able to defend in any way at all. But everybody thinks, oh my, this is a kid who is not going to go away. This is someone who has, in one afternoon, imprinted himself on football.
And describe what kind of player he is and where he plays. He's not a centre forward. He's not a classic number 9. He's quick, but he's not also a winger, and yet he scores lots of goals.
Well, he would say, and he told me, he's all those things. He is a winger and he is a centre forward. He said, I'm very rare among forwards that I can play in all three positions up front. He says, I'm a highly professional footballer in that way. You give him a role, he can execute it. Because, as I say, the thing about Kylian is he can think like a coach while having the capacities, every capacity you would want in a footballer. And so what does he have? I mean, I realize this most, you know, when you're watching a game as an opposition fan and you're watching the other team's best player and you're sitting there terrified of the guy and you hope he doesn't get the ball.
I'm thinking, why don't we have that guy?
Well, I knew why we didn't have it because for me, this was a Holland-France game last year.
Right.
In Paris. So I've got tickets at the Holland end because I grew up in Holland. I support Holland, which obviously is the most morally righteous team in football. I've grown up with that. I'm just a Dutch fan through and through, even though I'm not Dutch. And I'm there with my twin boys. They, unfortunately, are not Holland fans. They are France fans.
Good brothers.
We're sitting at the Dutch end, and after 9 minutes...
In Paris, right?
In Paris.
Okay.
After 9 minutes, it's 2-0 for France. And I think Mbappe's already got one. And all the Dutch fans at that point, when it's 2-0, we all just relax because, okay, the game is over. And one of my boys is teasing the Dutch fans. They're always having a laugh. We have a lovely, relaxed evening because the game is over. We cannot play against Kylian Mbappé. He's too good. And the thing about Mbappé I realized watching that night is he's going at top pace. It's not just that he's running at top pace, but he's executing everything at top pace. So every pass, every time he takes on the ball, it happens twice as fast as a normal player. And he's also watching. So he has what Thierry Henry also had. I remember I interviewed this Swiss goalkeeper once about playing against Thierry Henry, and it's the same for Mbappé. The goalkeeper said the thing about Henry is most strikers, when they have the ball, they're not looking at the goal. They're concentrating on the ball. They're concentrating on the defenders around them. And he says the terrifying thing about Henry is he has the ball, he's running towards you, and he's seeing the whole goal, and he's just thinking, where am I going to put this ball?
My spot? Yeah.
He can see everything. His control of the ball is so total with Thierry Henry and also with Mbappé that he's not worried about the defenders. He has the ball. He's going quicker than they are, and he's looking at the goal. And I realize he's sitting behind the Dutch goal. Kylian is looking at where he's going to put it. Where is the hole? And he's also going to hit that hole because he has this very dry shot. He's an extremely efficient footballer. He's very no frills. Mbappé doesn't...
No step overs.
Yeah.
No silliness.
He's not Cristiano Ronaldo. He has been coached to within an inch of his life by his father. You don't mess around. Every chance you finish, and you are there to execute in every minute of the game. So Kylian also has loads of assists. He's not really a selfish striker. He complains, he whines a lot about teammates who don't pass to him, whether it's Neymar or Olivier Giroud ones. But he himself, he's quite a generous footballer because he's the coach on the field.
So there's one bad habit that I think he's picked up, which I noticed most recently at the World Cup, which is that he's prone to a dive. I know he's running very fast, and I know the smallest amount of contact can get a penalty. But sometimes I'm like, Kylian, you're better than this.
You sound like such an English fan when you say that.
I am an English fan. Get off the ground. Stop rolling about. VAR
Stop fouling him. Stop fouling him. People are trying to cheat against Kylian all the time because they're not as good.
They're
trying to kick him and push him and pull him over. And if he falls to show that he has genuinely been fouled, then the primitives start saying, oh, he's diving, be a man. No, he should go down if he's kicked. If he's fouled, he should go down. He's showing to the referee contact has been made. The other team is cheating.
Bollocks, he dives.
There's one other thing that makes Mbappé special is that football is a game of decisions. You're constantly making decisions. Where should I be? Where should I pass to? Or if you're forward, or should I dribble? Should I shoot? Should I pass? And Kylian has a very, very high correct decision rate, which is a mark of a top-class footballer.
And incredibly rare for young footballers, right? Because you give them a lot of leeway to make bad decisions when they're younger.
Messi was a bad decision maker until he was about 21. Ronaldo was not a good decision maker as a young player. Guys who have everything, it's harder in a way for them to make good decisions because they think, I could do anything right now. Mbappé is very good at making the most efficient decision. So he's this wonder kid who's become a wonder adult in about 5 minutes. And France make the final in Moscow against Croatia. So you got this kid, he's 19 years old.
Are you there?
I was there the whole World Cup. And going into the final, the night before he says he's a little bit nervous, but then when the match comes, he's fine. He says, I was totally relaxed. And one of the French assistant coaches said, it was like he was playing for Paris Saint-Germain against Dijon in the French league. He was completely underwhelmed by the World Cup final. And in Bondy, his home suburb in Paris, the whole suburb is gathered in front of a big screen to watch the game. And these kids, they have their faces painted red, white and blue. They're sitting in front of the screen cheering on Kylian National, they call him Kylian National.
So France win that World Cup final. Mbappé scores. They beat Croatia 4-2.
He's a world champion, age 19. But after the match, he's completely ice cold. So this interviewer from French TV comes up to him and says, Kylian, it's amazing. You've won a World Cup. How do you feel? And he says, c'est déjà bien. It means it's already good. But there's a lot more. So he's totally, even at the moment of this grace triumph, he's totally relaxed about it.
But that's not the standard reaction, because all I remember from social media was that French team was
all the others
celebrating
went
like
bananas.
maniacs.
Yeah.
They're dabbing each other, going to the Elysee, dabbing Macron. There was that brilliant song named after N'Golo Kanté about every member of the team. And it was just, it was absolutely, rapturous. But he doesn't really take part in all of that.
No, it's true. They weren't completely bonkers. I was in the press conference at the end of the game, and Didier Deschamps, the French coach, is about to start speaking. Journalists has asked a question, and then a conga line of footballers burst into the press conference room, led by Paul Pogba, and they're chanting Didier Deschamps, Didier Deschamps, and they spray all of us journalists with water and champagne and energy drinks, and then they dance out, and then they dance back in, chanting Didier Deschamps. But Mbappé is not there. He's having fun. He's asked about this recently. There's this fantastic long interview with him on French TV this January in the Envoyé Spécial program. And the interviewer says to him, so, you won the World Cup. How did it feel looking back? And Mbappé says, it's very complicated, he says, and this might be incomprehensible, but he says, winning the World Cup didn't do much for me. It didn't do much for him emotionally, he's saying. And he says, why not? He said, maybe I was too young. I was so unaware. Winning made me happy, he said, but I didn't realize what I'd won.
The magnitude of what's just happened.
Yeah,
right?
It's just gone too quickly. I mean,
because Messi's waited 30 odd years for this moment.
Yeah. And Mbappé, it happens before he'd ever expected. I mean, I think he wouldn't have been surprised at 16 if you told him you're going to win the World Cup. He was just a bit surprised to win at age 19. It just happened too quickly for him to understand. So the day after they win the World Cup, the team arrives in Paris and they take a bus to the Champs-Élysées, and there's hundreds of thousands of people lining the route and cheering, and everybody's doing their nut, going completely out of their minds. And Mbappé, 19 years old, turns to the very aged head of the French Football Federation, Noël Le Graët, and Mbappé says, was this really necessary? Aren't people exaggerating a bit? And he's just so over it because he's grown up in a sporting family where nobody cares what you won yesterday. Yesterday is over. Only thing tomorrow. Have to be good tomorrow. And so he's thinking, what? Everyone's coming out to celebrate this prize that we won yesterday? And he just doesn't feel it at all. He's ice cold. And so then he brings back the World Cup trophy a few weeks later. He brings it home to Bondy, to his hometown, to say thank you, as it were, to say thank you to the town for everything that they've done with him. So really, he starts in football by winning a World Cup. But he's a very canny kid. So he realizes this is going to make life at Paris Saint-Germain more complicated because Neymar, he's years older. He's been waiting years to win a World Cup. He screwed up in the World Cup 2014, he screwed up in 2018, and now I've won a World Cup, and Neymar's my hierarchical superior. And Mbappé is clever enough to know he has to handle this. So he goes to Neymar when he comes back to Paris Saint-Germain, and he says, Neymar, you're the number one here. I'm not going to walk on your flower beds. You are the star here. So he's managing Neymar.
Okay, he's 19 years old. He's going back to his domestic team PSG with a World Cup. There's already a sense that he stayed too long. What keeps Mbappé at PSG?
He stays for so long. I mean, he stayed until the age of 25 in this league that's way beneath him, partly because of the French president, Emmanuel Macron. Mbappé sees him a lot. Macron invites him to dinners at the Élysée Palace. Macron did this long hug with him when he won the World Cup in 2018. Macron is all over Mbappé. And I think they get on. And Macron is always saying to him, you should stay in France. France needs you here. And I think that does make an impact when the president is always saying it's important that your football career be here. And so he has that role that he really wants, whereas at Real Madrid, he might not be taken seriously in that way. And also he feels, I'm one of the decision makers at PSG, my voice is heard. And so he has that kind of role that he really wants, which if he went to, say, Liverpool or Real Madrid, they might not take him seriously in that way. But yeah, he does, I think, understand that he's playing in a league that is beneath him. But this kind of hyper-confidence he has gets up people's noses. So there was this whole drama around the Pogba family where Paul's brother, Matthias, is accused of being part of a gang.
This is wild story.
Wild story. We'll come to it in our Pogba podcast, I'm sure we're going to do. Matthias is part of a gang trying to extort 13 million euros from Paul
his own brother.
Violence. And in the course of all this, Matthias says, Pogba has hired a marabout, a witch doctor, to cast a spell on Mbappé. Of course, Paul Pogba denies that. I think we should cite that denial here in the show.
No smoke without fire.
But I love the idea of a witch doctor trying to cast a spell on Mbappé, which, if true, the witch doctor is not very good.
It's having a reverse effect.
So the witch doctor's spell does not work. Mbappé is a superstar, but the family keep tight control of his superstardom. He and his parents are negotiating their contracts themselves. And the mother, Fayza, is planning to start a Kylian Mbappé private school in the Paris suburbs. They donate loads of money to Bondy's music school, to local sports clubs where he grew up, because they feel we were running all these things in Bondy and now we can actually fund them with millions of euros. They love that. And he has a kind of view of the football industry and he takes stances. So he boycotts advertising campaigns for sponsors of the French Football Federation that he morally disapproves of. He's not going to advertise for Coca-Cola, for KFC, the fast food, for gambling company, BetClick.
He's woke.
I would say, I hate the word woke, and I would say he is highly aware. And so he thinks...
Or awake.
Awake, okay. But on the other hand, he's a full-time employee of Qatar, who own Paris Saint-Germain, and he never criticizes Qatar. So as with almost everyone in football, their moral stances only go so far. Being a superstar, especially in his hometown, means that he doesn't really have a life. I mean, he lives like a prisoner. He cannot go outside because the moment he goes outside and some rando sees Kylian, the rando photographs him and posts the picture online and says, here I am, at the bakery with Kylian, and then within literally 4 minutes, there are 3,000 people there. Yeah. And so he just has to sit inside. And he said that when he has kids, he won't be able to tell them about his youthful misadventures because he won't have had any.
He does escape sometimes, though. And you mentioned that he loves the NBA. So he's in the States quite often. And one of the funniest clips I've seen of him is with one of his best mates. Ashraf Hakimi, who's a fullback at PSG. The two of them put on balaclavas and head to Times Square.
Times Square, all right.
Right, the most touristy hotspot area in the world's biggest, most visited city. And you see the two of them wearing their very nice designer clothes, bomber jackets, just watching like the street dancers in Times Square. And
nobody recognizes them.
Someone clearly does, because someone's videoing them and being like, I'm pretty sure this is Kylian Mbappé and Ashraf Hakimi wearing balaclavas, watching people go around in Times Square. So there's perhaps some moments of escape. Maybe, I think in America, he's becoming much better known. You've seen him now doing interviews with ESPN in English.
Yeah, he does it in English with a full American accent.
With a great American accent. And you see him at the front row of the NBA games, which is where all the superstars are. And the more you're at the front row of the NBA games, the more Americans will know who you are. So maybe even the US is not going to be a safe space for Kylian.
He's in the front row with Spike Lee and Woody Allen.
Yeah, those guys.
But at home in France, the reception is still a bit mixed. I mean, look, most French people adore Mbappé. But if you're black and you're a multi-millionaire, you're pressing a lot of French buttons. These are things that don't always go well with the mass of the French population. I mean, whenever he speaks, he makes an incredibly good impression. I mentioned he did this TV program with Envoyé Spécial in France in January. And afterwards, normally when a celebrity goes on TV and gives a long interview, everyone in social media is slagging them off, who does he think he are, and isn't he an idiot? And I was scrolling through Twitter after Mbappe's appearance, and all these French people are saying, oh, wow, mais il est bon. They loved him. He went down so well. His mother, totally authentic figure, comes across really well. And he has this poise when he speaks. Every word is in the right place, like when he's running. This is kind of grace and elegance to it. And he's sometimes funny, and he has this very mobile face that I can't think of a footballer in our generation who makes such a good speaking impression in any country, in any language.
Wow. So the French love him. He's their boy.
Most French people love him, but when he misses a penalty against Switzerland to get France knocked out of Euro 2020, he gets a lot of racist abuse. And he briefly retires from the French team. He quickly comes back, but he's understandably really shocked by it.
So that's a tournament where we remember the England players who miss penalties getting racist abuse, and it's a huge scandal here in the UK. But I don't remember hearing much about what happens to Mbappe. Is this online abuse? How does it manifest itself?
There's a lot of online abuse, and he rightly is outraged.
And is it a national scandal in France the same way it becomes here in England?
Not really, no. No, there's not a rallying round Mbappe like he has been racially abused. This is not unacceptable.
But when it comes to racism, Mbappe has to tread on pretty treacherous terrain, and choosing when to speak out and not when to speak out is a difficult judgment for him to make often.
Yeah, so, he's spoken out a bit about police violence, but cautiously. And when I interviewed him, I said, so, what about police violence? You must feel particularly strongly about that as a young black man from the suburbs and young black men from the suburbs. And there have been riots in France
over the last year over the killings of young black men in France.
Yeah, there are various George Floyd type cases in France involving young black men or young Arab origin men who have been beaten or killed by police. And so when I asked this, I'm sitting around him in a group of about 4 or 5 people of his entourage. And when I asked this question, this heavyset black man sitting next to me says, we're not going to answer that, which is when I realized that this is Wilfrid, this is the father. And Wilfrid says, we're not going to answer that because it's not just, police violence is not just against black men. You cannot ask that question. My reading of what was happening is that the family does not want Kylian to be a spokesman for racial issues, to present himself as a kind of black man who's critical of France, because that is a very vulnerable place to be.
You become a lightning rod for the far right and the rest.
Yeah, and you've seen already that Karim Benzema, who has made way more missteps in his career, is a much less impressive human being, I think, than Mbappe, that a brilliant footballer has become sort of very unpopular with most people in his own country, Benzema, and it's very, very easy as a black player or a player of Arab origin in France to get on the wrong side of the French public, and the Mbappés are very careful for that not to happen. But Kylian does speak out against racism, he does speak out against police violence, but he's very careful in how he does it.
And he doesn't do it in the same way that other young French superstars right now. I'm thinking of Aurélien Tchouameni at Real Madrid, who, when a lot of the riots in France were happening, is a young black man of a generation of those who are victims of police brutality. And if you go on his X or Twitter account, you get this very unvarnished emotional response from somebody who's frustrated at the lack of progress. And I think someone like Tchouaméni, I would argue, connects much more with a younger generation of French kids who are very fed up. And I think Kylian actually stands out for being still very managed, very poised, and making sure that any of his interventions, these kinds of issues, are going to hurt him in the long run. I mean, personally speaking, I think the Tchouaméni voice is still important and needed, because you still need these kind of guys who just present their very kind of emotional and knee-jerk responses to things that they think are injustices.
I agree, but I wouldn't discount Mbappe's response entirely. I mean, he's not varnishing the French system. He is critical. He will say things, but he will be a diplomatic voice.
Exactly.
In 2022, he's still only 23 years old. He goes to his second World Cup. Not bad. He scores a hat-trick in the final. He's brilliant throughout. Amazing how casually we can say the line, he scores a hat-trick in the final. At this World Cup, he says he's much more aware of what a World Cup means, of its significance, than when he was 19 and he wins it and the whole thing kind of flies by because it's just happened too quickly. And France lose the final on penalties. In fact, another kid from Bondy, from his hometown, almost last minute, face-to-face with the Argentinian goalkeeper, could have won the World Cup. That really would have been a Bondy goal. Kolo Muani, who now plays for Paris Saint-Germain alongside Mbappé, is born in Bondy in the same month of the same year, December 98, as Kylian.
Wow.
So he's an all-Bondy forward line.
And now he's at PSG.
And is now with him at PSG.
Brilliant viral clip of halftime. France are losing 2-0 in that World Cup final. And you see Mbappé rally his troops and he tells them, this is a World Cup final. We need to go out there and show something of us. And I think, for me...
Well, they played the worst half of the World Cup final in the history of the world.
And he drags his team single-handedly by getting them back in the match. And I think that's when I have this whole newfound respect for Mbappé. I want France to win anyway. I want Mbappé to lift that trophy. My heart is always with France at World Cups. But seeing him do that, that iconic halftime speech, I think kind of takes him into another level of,
yeah, he's become a
coach.
He's become a coach. It's beautiful when you see that, when you see somebody who is just a natural leader and knows how to speak and knows what to say to people at a moment like that. He goes back to PSG. They get knocked out of the Champions League again by Bayern, and he thinks, this is over. I'm done with this club. Mbappé tries to leave in the summer of 2023. PSG don't let him. There's a standoff. They kick him out of the squad for a while. And in the end, he agrees, I'll stay for one last season. And he's offered 700 million euros to spend one season in Saudi. And he says, no, not going to do it. Because anyone who's rich in France gets the criticism that they're money grubbing. And the Mbappés get that all the time. And Fayza, his mother, has said in this French TV interview, she said, look, if they'd offered us €1 billion, we'd have taken €1 billion. What would you do? She's very kind of frank and authentic about it. But they're not so money grubbing as to take 700 million euros, which, by far the largest fee ever offered to a footballer, salary ever offered to a footballer for one season to play in Saudi. He's not going to do that. He's not going to do a Jordan Henderson.
Mbappé is at the top of his game. Probably playing for the French national team brings out the best in him. And he's also of that generation of young football where there's only been one question, Messi or Ronaldo.
To which the answer is Messi, by the way.
He's grown up in the GOAT age. I'm not going to dispute that. This binary, Messi or Ronaldo. Where does he fit in the echelon of the GOATs? And how does it shape the way he thinks about his own role as a young footballer, where the question is now Mbappé or Haaland, Bellingham or Mbappé? He's also getting, thrown into the mix. And there are rivals for the title of the GOAT of this generation.
Yeah, I mean, if you're that good, you are playing not just to win matches, and these guys, they're not just thinking about the team. They're thinking about their own place in the history of football. And Mbappé is thinking about his place in the history of football. The question of, is he the best? Every time he goes out onto the field, he tells himself, I'm the best. He literally says that to himself. And he thinks that's necessary. He says, if you're a great footballer, you have to have a big ego. Because he says in high-level football, nobody will make a place for you or tell you that you're capable of things. It's up to you to persuade yourself that you are. So he says to himself, you're the best, I'm the best. And he said to me, it's like bakers. He said, you always compare yourself with the best in your sport, just like the baker compares himself with the best bakers around him. So the baker asks who makes the best croissant, the baker in France
That's such a
asks.
French
Yeah,
analogy.
but he uses this great French analogy. The baker asks who makes the best croissant, who makes the best pain au chocolat. And Mbappé says, I watch matches of other great players to see what they're doing. He thinks, I know how to do this, but can the other guy do it? And he says, I think other players watch me too, and that pushes them to raise their game. And he says that always pushed Messi and Ronaldo, the rivalry they had. Messi was good for Ronaldo, he says, and Ronaldo was good for Messi. And so all these guys, they're watching each other. They're competing with each other as well as just trying to win trophies and matches. And in 2019, Mbappe's in contention for highest scorer in Europe. And so, there are these rankings every weekend, most goals. And he noticed that Messi would always score one more than he got. So Mbappé says, I would score 2, he would score 3. I would score 3, he would score 4. And Mbappé says it was so crazy that I talked to Ousmane. Ousmane Dembélé is Mbappe's sidekick, who was then at Barca. And Mbappé says to Ousmane Dembélé, it's not possible. Is Messi doing it on purpose? Is Messi scoring one more than me every weekend because he's checking how many goals I've scored? And Dembélé says to Mbappé, of course he's watching you. Like, duh. Messi always wants to be the best every season, and he motivates himself by making sure he's doing better than Ronaldo or Mbappe. And that season, 2018-19, Messi finishes as Europe's leading scorer. He has 36 goals, 3 ahead of Mbappe. And you can bet that if Mbappe had scored 40 goals, Messi would have scored a couple more. So Mbappe's in this competition with the other greats, but the thing is, he knows he is not the best. He knows inside himself that Messi and Ronaldo are better than he will ever be. And he said to me, I said, you're not just being modest and disingenuous about this. And he says, look, I know they're better than me. And it's not only me who knows that. He says, everybody knows they're better than me. And if you tell yourself that you're going to be better than Messi and Ronaldo, that's beyond ego or beyond determination. It's just lack of awareness. It's a kind of ignorance to say, oh, I can be better than Messi. Those players, he said, are incomparable. They have broken all the laws of statistics. And thinking about it, what he said, I think he was being real. I think it's true. He's not just being modest. He knows there is a level above Mbappe. There's only one level above Mbappe, but that level is Messi and Ronaldo. Mbappe is a more limited player than they are. He's not a creator. He's not as great a dribbler. He's a brilliant, efficient specialist. But now we're in this new era, right? I mean, Messi and Ronaldo, they're still walking, they're still scoring, but they've exited the stage as GOATs. And now, as you say, Mbappe is competing with Haaland and Bellingham for the status of the GOAT of their generation. And that status is totally up for grabs. No man under the age of 36 today has ever won the Ballon d'Or, the Footballer of the Year trophy. Nobody who's now younger than 36. And so winning...
Like being US president.
Yeah, it's like nobody under the age of 100 has been US president except Obama. Yeah.
And the interesting thing about Haaland and Bellingham is they're a little bit later to this debate. It looked like the question about Mbappe's generation, it was clear there was just him. He was clear of all of his peers until recently. So Haaland makes the jump from the Bundesliga to the Premier League, has an incredible first season. And, you can't help but wonder whether Mbappe sees Haaland and then Bellingham, who's now in his first season at Madrid, also banging in the goals.
Yeah, he definitely competes with everyone, with Haaland, with Bellingham.
Yeah, same age group, although Bellingham is a little bit younger. They're in the biggest leagues in the world. They're getting all the plaudits. He wants to be there. He's sort of, I wouldn't say he's marginalised in Ligue 1, but it just gets way less attention.
The Farmers League, as it's known.
The Uber Eats League, but that's actually what it's called, which is a par on the league. And there's a question about Bellingham, of course, who part of the reasons he's scoring so much is because there's not a recognised striker in the current Real Madrid team. He's playing much further up the pitch. He has managed to, have this great relationship with Vinicius, which wasn't entirely clear at the beginning of the season. Vinicius is also doing well. He'll have to change positions again next season when Kylian arrives. And between the three of them, they probably will have to share the spoils rather than Mbappe getting 40 goals a season. So, it's an open question about whether or not he'd be okay with that being as part of a prolific front 3 or 4.
I think he's definitely put in his diary he's going to score 40 goals a season. So he wants the others just to deal with that.
And do you think that he is positionally versatile? Because he sort of has carried this thing on his back that he only likes playing on the wing. He doesn't want to be a central focal point striker, false nine or whatever. And he doesn't like it when managers try and put him in other places.
He doesn't like it, but he can do it. So he told me I can play in all three positions up front, and not many forwards can do that. So that's another of his kind of boasts to complete professionalism. I mean, mind you, Bellingham can play in all 22 positions.
Camavinga can also play as a referee. He could probably be assistant coach. I mean, but you're an evangelist for Madrid. You went and lived in Madrid.
Yeah, it was a brilliant decision. So I did exactly what Kylian's doing now. In 2021, I went on loan from Paris to Madrid. We moved there with the family for a year. And it was a brilliant decision. I mean, as Kylian is going to discover, Madrid is a much nicer, more livable city than Paris. The sun shines, people are really friendly, it costs half of Paris. What's not to like? We then made the huge mistake of returning from Madrid to Paris, a mistake that I hope and trust Kylian will not
Unsuccessful loan spell. They didn't sign you on, no?
No, they desperately wanted me to stay, but
cost too much money.
they couldn't afford me. Madrid couldn't afford me.
Hakimi's also been teaching him Spanish from my assiduous stalking of his social media.
The thing is that Mbappé learned Spanish as he did English as a teenager. And so when you see him arguing on the field 2 or 3 years ago with Barcelona players, he's doing it in Spanish. And I said, how come you speak Spanish? And he said it was a big advantage at PSG because most of the players can't speak French. And so you can kind of reach people all over the squad and also deal with the coach who usually can't speak French either.
You have no doubts that this is all going to be a brilliant fairy tale.
I think he's going to be happy, it's going to work out, and he's going to win a Champions League. Finally. But when we look back on Mbappé, when we think of his legacy, we're going to remember him above all, I think, as the man of World Cups. Because what his place is in the history of football, what he has over Messi and Ronaldo, is that he comes from the city and the country with probably the biggest talent base in world football. He is from France, and that is just beautiful in football. And so he's now 25, he's already played 2 World Cup finals. He's young enough that he has a shot at matching Pelé's haul of 3 World Cups. And in fact, Pelé is the figure in football that he's most often compared to, and even Pelé himself makes this comparison. Pelé, who died last year, said, everyone compares me to Mbappé. And then Pelé says, we look alike, don't we? Somebody sent me a photo montage in which our faces are mixed together to tease me. Pelé says, we look terribly alike. And then he says, I think Mbappé can become the new Pelé. This is Pelé speaking. I mean, who are we to say that that's wrong?
And if your prescience is anything to go by, he's going to become the best player ever to have then become a manager?
He's definitely going to become a coach, yeah. He's been destined to become a coach since birth.
I think Ronaldo's threatening, Cristiano Ronaldo's threatening to become a coach
too.
I
don't see that working out quite as beautifully as Mbappé. I think to be a coach, you have to be interested in other people. To be a coach, you have to be able to...
You don't remember the Euros where Ronaldo's either injured or gets subbed off and he's on the touchline doing all the manager stuff?
He says to the Portugal players, you got to win it for me or something like that. No, I think Mbappé is emotionally several decades more mature than Ronaldo, and he's also a better communicator, not just that Ronaldo, but then, as I say, pretty much any other 20-something that I've encountered in football. But, the standard question that we ask at the end of this podcast is, what about as a person, would you like to hang out with him in his mansion? He calls you and says, Marine, I'm at home.
Let's play FIFA.
Let's play FIFA. I can't go outside because I'll be mobbed. So you go around with your FIFA?
Yeah, I'll put my balaclava on and go. Well, there's got to be careful in France when you cover your face as a Muslim woman. Yeah, definitely. I mean, of all the people that we've talked about so far, he's closer to my generation. Well, I'm much older than him, but he is that era of footballers where I feel connected to them because they expose themselves on social media, because they're very human, because they live in the same kind of globalized monoculture that is the world that I do. So I think I'd have a pretty easy time getting on with Kylian, more than some of the other figures that we've already mentioned on this podcast.
Okay, well...
and you've already hung out with him many times, so...
No, I've hung out with him once, but I did enjoy the conversation. He's an uplifting person to speak to. Yeah.
I would prefer Kylian to be president of the Fifth Republic or whatever number of republic we're going to be on, then become a football manager, because why not?
Yeah, I think he would be a very decent president. Thank you for listening to Heroes and Humans of Football. For more information, go to our website at heroesandhumans.com.
And follow us at Heroes and Humans on all social platforms. In next week's episode, we're discussing Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich, the man who made modern Chelsea. Check it out. New episodes every Thursday. This show was developed by Immaterial and produced by One Fine Play. Matt Cheney is the series producer. Kazra Firuzia is the editor and producer. We have been your hosts, Mehreen Khan
and Simon Cooper.
And this has been Heroes and Humans of Football.